Thursday, the 5th of February, about 17 days' time, 4 years ago, the war in Ukraine started, the special military operation. And here we are, hundreds of thousands of people killed, and it doesn't look like there's any end to it. We're going to be talking about that conflict in this video. Thank you again. Please like, comment, subscribe, and give us a thumbs up. And you'll find all the links for the guests in the description below. Hey, Vladimir, thank you so much for making yourself available.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
I had such a fabulous conversation with you before about the state of Russia currently, and set aside from, all the propaganda that we get in the West, certainly in Britain, about Russia. And we're going to be talking about the Ukraine-Russia war.
Yes.
And just, I suppose, getting an overview, because what we're told about it in the mainstream media, the BBC and the Guardian, the Financial Times, the Economist, Le Monde, not that I read Le Monde, they never ever lie, is that Russia, unprovoked, attacked Ukraine, and that Russia is, I mean, it's so crazy. Russia is going to invade Europe. So we need to arm ourselves and our leaders tell us that we have to get ready to send our children to fight Russia. Not their children, but our children. And at the same time, Russia's terrible because they've only, I don't know, run a few miles of Ukrainian territory all these years.
Yes.
Now, you are a retired professor of Russian history and politics from
Yes.
Harvard and many other wonderful places, and you live in Europe currently. So,
Yes.
what's the deal with Ukraine, Russia? Take it away.
Yes. Let me explain it in the briefest way I can. Now people must be aware that Russia and Ukraine have been in one country for almost 400 years now. So it's like in 1658, 58, in 1658, there was a leader of a province that was called Ukraine. And if you translate it into English, that means the land at the edge. Ukraine, U means at, and Krai means edge. And that was at the edge of Poland. The lands at the edge of Poland were Russian Orthodox peasants that the medieval Great Polish Poland controlled. At that time, Poland extended into Lithuania and Belarus, and northern Germany, Prussia. It was huge at that time. So the lands at the edge rebelled against the Poles. And at that time, it was not the Poles, they were Catholics. And the Orthodox peasants rebelled against Catholics and asked the Russian Tsar Alexei to take them to under his protection. And actually, when Tucker Carlson interviewed Putin, Putin gave Tucker Carlson a document, an authentic document, a copy of it, of the Bogdan Khmelnytsky, the Ukrainian leader, who sent this letter to Tsar Alexei. And so Alexei said yes. And since then, Kiev and the area around it, lands at the edge, became a part of the Russian Empire. Now, these people were actually, if we go back another couple of centuries before the Tatar invasion, they were the core of Russia. This is where Russia started. This is where the Kievan Rus is the area where the Russian nation began. So it's not like they're foreigners. It's the same people who expanded from Kiev, and one of their princes, Vladimir, started Moscow and then expanded further north to Novgorod. In other words, the Russian nation began at Kiev. They're not foreigners. They were the original ones. Then most of Russia was conquered by the Tatars and Mongols, and they controlled it until about 1500. And then the part that was taken over by Poland was what we call today Ukraine. So then in 1658, this part returned. But this is only a small part of today's Ukraine. And then the lands to the east of the Dnieper River, they're called Novorossiya, which means New Russia. Now, these were the lands that Catherine II won in a war against Turkey, against Ottoman Empire. And they belonged to the Crimean Tatars. And the Crimean Tatars were there from the times of the Mongol invasion. And they were really quite a culture. They were a civilized state with the palaces and waterworks and so forth. The Crimean Tatars' history is that of an interesting example of a Islamic civilization on the territory of Russia, Ukraine. But then they were conquered by Catherine II, and she gave the name to this land Novorossiya, New Russia, and she founded the city of Odessa. And then later on Kharkov, and all the lands to the east were Novorossiya. And the lands of what is today central Ukraine were called Malorossiya, which means small Russia. But here I want to explain to people, this is very important, what is small Russia? Now, I once had a map, which I collected maps, and I had a map of 1805, which was Napoleon's map, and it was written on it, imprimé dans les majestés, blah, blah, blah. It was a map of Europe, and in it, it said, Petite Pologne, Grande Pologne, Petite Russie, Grande Russie, Petite France, Grande France. So what it meant is that you have a core area, and then you have a larger area around it. So Petite Pologne, and even now, I was just last week I was in Poland, and one part of it where Krakow is called Malopolska, which means small Poland, which means core Poland, the original Poland. And this is like Klein Deutschland, the original Deutschland, and then the Gross Deutschland, the big Germany. So what the Russians called Malorossia or Ukraine is the core Russia. That was the definition. This is where Russia started. It's the area around Kiev. And so this name survived until 1917. There was a core Russia, Malorossia. There was a new Russia, Novorossiya. And there was a Grand Russia, Velikorossia, which is Grand Russia. So this is how it was. This name survived until 1917. Then the revolution happened, Russian Empire collapsed, and the Ukrainians in the West wanted to create an independent Ukraine, and they did, and they were supported by the whites and by the French and by the Germans and so on, but they never ever included in what they call independent Ukraine of 1917 territories of Odessa or Kharkov or anything east of it. They never dreamed of it because that was not Malorossia. This was not Ukraine at that time. These territories were Novorossiya. They were populated by the Russians and by the Cossacks. But it was Lenin. It was Lenin who, when they created the Soviet Union in 1922, he gave these territories to Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic because he wanted to have control over them by having a Russian majority. And he transferred the capital of Ukraine to Kharkov. And he abolished the name Malorossia and adopted a Polish name, Ukraine, kind of playing up to the nationalist feelings of Western Ukraine. So this is how Ukraine, Soviet Socialist Republic, acquired areas of Donbass and Kharkov and Odessa. It became half Ukraine, half Russia combined. Now the dialects are very, very similar. Without any training ever, I understand about 70% of Ukrainian. And when I was in Poland, I never studied a day a Polish language, but I could understand quite a lot because the roots are very similar in all Slavic languages, Polish, Czech, Croatian. I could understand almost 90%. So that's the point. This was a creation of Lenin. And finally, after World War II, when the Russian armies took Galicia, which was former Austria-Hungary, Stalin annexed those areas of Western, what today is called Western Ukraine. And this is how Ukraine, Soviet Socialist Republic, stretched from Lvov, which they call Lviv, all the way to Donbass and to the Don River. So Ukraine consists of three distinct parts even today. West Ukraine that have a dialect that East Ukrainians don't understand. And I know it because in my job I traveled to Ukraine in 2000 every 2 months. I had conferences there, scholarly contacts, etc. The people in Kharkov could not understand what people from Lvov were saying. It was totally different. So this is not. If there is a national Ukrainian language, it's a mixture of all these three. The most difficult to comprehend is former Austria-Hungarian part, which is Galicia in Lvov. So three parts. There's a central part which used to be called Malorossia or Small Russia, eastern part which is really Russia under the new name, and the extreme west which is Lvov. Now, what happened in 2014? Ukraine had good relations. When the Soviet Union split, it was actually the Communist Party chiefs of Ukraine, Belarus, and Russia who split the Soviet Union. They are the ones who gathered together in a place called Belovesh Pusha, the forest, or in a place where Belarus, Russia, and Ukraine meet. This is where they met in November 2001. And they said, this is it, we're quitting the Soviet Union. And instead of suppressing them and arresting them, Gorbachev resigned, and that was the end of the Soviet Union. Now, some people say that he should have shot them and kept the Union, and that would have been it. But he, again, which is typical for Gorbachev, preferred to do nothing rather than act. But anyway, the Soviet Union collapsed because the communist leaders, without any referenda in any of these countries, got together and said, we, the three biggest republics, leave the Union. And then the Central Asian republics couldn't do anything, even though they wanted to stay in the Soviet Union. The republics that wanted to leave were the Baltic republics, Georgia, and that's it. The other ones wanted to stay together during the referendum of 1990. Now these three split, and
Sorry, the
when they
referendum of when?
it was
1990.
in 1990,
Okay,
yeah, and
yeah.
the 70% of people in the Soviet Union voted to stay and preserve the Union. Gorbachev wanted to use it as an argument to keep the Union, but then Yeltsin and Kuchma, and I forgot the name of the Ukrainian and the Belarusian first secretary of the Communist Party. They got together and said, we leave, and the Soviet Union collapsed a month later. But here's the important thing for your listeners. At the Declaration of Independence of Ukraine of 1991, it pledged to be non-nuclear, non-bloc, which means belonging to no military alliances of any kind, to have open border and joint pensions and for families who live in both parts. It was pretty much like Canada and the United States have been and still are now. Open borders and a possibility of labor migration. So people could live in Russia or Ukraine or anywhere, and it was supposed to be that kind of a system of pretty much like in European Union. That was the way it was when I was there in the year 2000. The border was open. I traveled freely between my places of research, which is Kharkov, Yekaterinburg, Moscow, Petersburg. That's lasted until 2014. And in 2014, there was a Maidan revolution, as they call it, or a coup d'etat, as others call it, as a result of which the nationalist party came to power, and they wrote in a constitution that they want to join NATO. That's in their constitution. They want to join NATO. That's in the constitution. And they started closing Russian churches and starting promoting Ukrainian language at the expense of the Russian one. And when they came to power, Crimea announced that they quit. They don't want to be
This was
in.
Poroshenko, right?
No. Poroshenko was elected
Lukashenko?
in June 2015.
Is it Lukashenko?
No,
Or
the
Yanukovych?
Crimea, Crimea immediately, as soon as the election results were in 2014, they announced they leave that Ukraine, and they wrote to the Russian Duma asking them to admit them to Russia. And Putin obliged, and he couldn't do anything else, even if he wanted to go against and have you, because the Russian fleet was there, and the Russian army units were already in Crimea. So Putin couldn't stop Crimea joining Russia, but he did stop Donbass. And people of Donbass actually are quite upset with Putin for that, because he could have admitted them in 2014. He could have done the same thing as with Crimea. But he said, no, you have to stay with Ukraine. And this was a result of a Minsk Accord. So in 2015, they signed Minsk Accord, which is Putin's compromise to be nice to Europe, not to upset Merkel and other European leaders. So the Minsk Accord were that Donbass stays with Ukraine, but it has open borders and it has a special economic status of free trade with Russia. This was a kind of a compromise that Ukrainians could have had, but they
Yes.
rejected it. They rejected it. And the
Excuse me,
last attempt,
Vladimir.
yeah,
Sorry for interrupting. I just want to go back a little bit. So, 2014, the Maidan coup,
yeah,
and from the stuff that I've looked at, that yeah, it's talked about an organic revolution. I think it was a color revolution with the support of the CIA, probably
yes,
MI6 as well,
yes,
right?
yes,
Um, who came to? Because was it Yanukovych? There was an election just before that, and he wanted to bring Ukraine closer to Russia versus
yes,
the European Union, and the people
yes,
supported that. It was a free and fair election, is my
yes,
understanding.
yes, yes.
And then in the coup he was replaced by, was it Poroshenko or somebody else?
Poroshenko was elected only in June the following year, but
Right,
it was Yatsenyuk and it was some other people who
like a
took over
transitional
power.
government. And
Yeah,
then
and they
in
immediately
Crimea,
went to Washington, and they immediately had CIA people coming to Kiev and doing all kinds of appointments. And the Americans were boasting that they are in charge of who is going to be what in Ukraine, making appointments to the government. It was really a CIA takeover. And whether it was a coup, but some people argue, and I must admit that they're right, it was also a revolution. People were rising against corruption. They had enough. But it
yes,
was high, the way I put it, there was a Maidan revolution which was hijacked, kidnapped by the nationalist CIA appointed coup leaders who opened fire on police first. And then accused them of opening fire on them, and then they seized Kiev. Now,
okay.
again, here is one point where I criticize Putin. I think that he had a lack of resolute action, and he could have said, and people now, a lot of people say what I'm saying. He could have actually rescued Yanukovych, and he could have said, "This is an elected president, and we will not allow a coup in Kiev." And he did speak in Duma, and the Duma supported in a resolution provision of Russian troops to restore order in Ukraine. And at that time, Russian tanks could have rolled into Kiev, and Kiev had nothing at all to stop them. And maybe it would have saved a million lives if he had done it. But he lost the nerve. Here's one and only point that I criticize President Putin. He could have been and should have been more resolute in 2014, but he didn't. He preferred to negotiate with the West and to make a compromise and to be nice and blah, blah, blah. And as a result, there was this Minsk Accord, which
Vladimir, sorry,
didn't
excuse
last.
me. Before we get into the Minsk Accord, there's something else I want to ask you. Because
Yeah,
what's reported in by the Guardian and the BBC. By the way, I do look at the Guardian occasionally just to
yeah,
just to see what the others, what the propaganda that's being rolled out.
yeah,
That Crimea was illegally annexed. But my understanding is there was actually a plebiscite, a
Yes,
vote,
there was.
and then
There
over
was a
90% of the, and it was a free and fair referendum,
absolutely.
and over 90% of the people voted for Crimea to join Russia,
Yes,
which kind of
exactly.
makes absolute sense because they're all Russian speakers.
Yes. Now, not only that, but Crimea is another separate case because when I told you that Novorossiya was given to Ukraine by Lenin, Crimea was not. Crimea remained a part of the Russian Federal Soviet Socialist Republic until 1954.
Right.
And it was in 1954 that Khrushchev, who was half Ukrainian, uh, changed the administrative borders within one country and gave it from a Russian Soviet Socialist Republic to Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic to commemorate the 300th anniversary of unity of Russian and Ukrainian people. That's what it said in the official declaration. And it didn't matter much because it was still the Soviet Union. It was from one administrative border to another administrative border. It would be like if one county, Lafayette, was given from Texas to Louisiana.
Mm.
That's the extent of it. It didn't make a big deal at that time. Anyway, I followed the events in Crimea in great detail. I studied their proceedings of the Supreme Soviet, and I know that they immediately, after the elections in Kiev, before even Yanukovych was ousted, they wrote to Duma in Moscow and said, we cannot stay in Ukraine if the nationalists take it over. And there were preparations made. And when Yanukovych fled, and it was clear that the government in Kiev is going to stay, they conducted a referendum, and the majority, the absolute majority, joined Russia because they are Russian and they've not even had anything at all Ukrainian about them. Now,
Okay.
about Minsk Accords,
Yes.
as I
Thank
said,
you.
he signed it, but the Ukrainians never followed through. And in 2015, they opened an offensive against Donbass. And they pushed and pushed. And if you look at the map, they came already uh, to the border of the city of Donetsk. I have pictures of the airport of Donetsk, which is now being restored, which is right on the outskirts of the city itself. In other words, two-thirds of Donbass was militarily taken over by Ukrainian armed forces in 2015. And they were armed by the West. The military supplies are beginning already coming to Ukraine from the West. And if you look at the map of Donbass in 2015, one third, it was literally just on the outskirts of the city of Donetsk and the city of Lugansk, where the only small corner of it remained Donetsk People's Republic. Now, and that's how it stayed until 2022, with daily bombardment of Donetsk. And
Yeah.
Donetsk now has a list of people, 14,000 civilians that were killed by the bombardments that were continuous from Ukrainian side. Now, what happened in 2022? Again, I have several videos that people want to watch. One of them is called Putin's Ultimatum. Putin, in December 21, he sent what I call a Putin ultimatum to the West, saying that the slow takeover of Ukraine by NATO bases is unacceptable. And they have to get out and confirm neutral status for Ukraine. And if they don't do it, Putin said, there will be, quote, technical military means. The West ignored it. There was a meeting in Paris in December 21 and then in Berlin under the so-called Normandy format, and they rejected Putin's ultimatum. And then, and this is the most important thing, in January 2021, armed by Americans, the Ukrainians resumed bombardment of Donetsk. So when they say that it was unprovoked Russian attack, this is a total lie. They deliberately broke the ceasefire and started shelling Donetsk, hoping that the Russians would respond, because at that time they were sure they were going to win. They wanted to finish off Donetsk and take over the last third of it remaining in the hands of the Donetsk People's Republic. And then they wanted to continue because they thought Russia was so weak and they're so strong that they had all these plans of breaking Russia into four parts. And this was official at that time. I'm not inventing it. I think that the American official position was to render to Russia a strategic defeat. That was the language used at that time when the war started. Now,
Sorry,
when
Vladimir,
this,
before you go on, just very quickly, there
yeah,
were also post-Soviet Union agreements between the United States or NATO and the Russia that the nuclear weapons that were in Ukraine would go to Russia. Ukraine wouldn't have
yes,
nuclear weapons, and the
that's
US
right.
agreed to that. And the US also agreed that it would never be allowed to join NATO. I think that
Yes,
was the Budapest Agreement. And
yeah, the
it's
Budapest,
important,
Bucharest. Yes, yes.
Bucharest Agreement, that those agreements got violated. And I remember that political giant that is Kamala Harris in February 20th, I think it was, or 21st, she said that the United States was going to give nuclear weapons to Ukraine.
Yes, this was like it was like this. It was February, Munich Security
Yes.
Conference. And it was Zelensky who spoke at that conference, and he spoke that Ukraine intends to obtain nuclear weapons. This was actually one last drop that moved Putin to start the special military operation because that was just too much.
Yeah.
But here's another important thing. Putin's original goals were not what they're today. They keep shifting, and we can talk more about it. But the original goal is to force Ukraine to respect Minsk Accords. So this is why they started the special military operations with 200,000 men, the army of 200,000, which is basically not enough to occupy Ukraine or even a part of Ukraine. And this is what the nationalists now are reproaching Putin for, that he wasn't prepared and he didn't think it would be such a big war, because what they did, and they did accomplish what they wanted. After 2 months of fighting, in April, they assembled in Istanbul, and the Ukrainians signed the agreement. If they had kept it, they would have still had Donbas as a part of Ukraine,
Yeah.
because the provisions were that there would be no NATO, no foreign troops, that the status of Donbas would be as it was in Minsk. It was, some people call it Minsk III, that they would simply respect the special status of Donbas. But they signed it, they went home, and the rumor, I mean, what the Russians are told now is that Boris Johnson came to Kiev, spoke to Zelensky, said, "We will support you as long as it takes, whatever it takes. We
Yeah.
will give you whatever you want, and keep on fighting." And
Yeah.
they still keep on fighting.
Can I get in? Thank you. Let me just say, because that is certainly what the British press are now saying. They weren't saying it at the time, but they're saying it now. Boris Johnson flew out and said, listen, you carry on killing, sending your men to die for Ukrainian Slavs to kill Russian Slavs, and we will cheer you on. Carry on doing that, defeating
Yeah,
the Russian ogre that is Putin. And the tragedy is I don't know, over 1 million people died where Slav is killing Slav,
yeah.
right? And I just want to say that if you're in Britain and you oppose how this, how our government has been supporting genocide and terrorism and war and crimes against humanity, whether it's in Ukraine or the Middle East or Yemen, as per UK recent foreign policy, and you'd rather our government was lobbying for peace, you can legally, lawfully, peacefully withhold your tax. Go to notaxforwar.com. This works for you. This is entirely legal in the UK for UK citizens to legally withhold their tax as protest against war. Just wanted to get that in, Vladimir. Excuse me.
Okay, that's good. That's good. Yeah. Well, basically, that's the answer. How the war started. All these talks about unprovoked makes me laugh because um, I I followed that very attentively, and the American NPR station had an interview with the Azov battalion, which is like neo-Nazi battalion, just as the war started. This was in February 2022. I remember it. One can find this broadcast, and the Azov battalion guy told NPR, we want to kill as many Russians as we can. It was so much hatred there. And this was all orchestrated by the CIA. And they were all, if you look at the pictures of them in Mariupol, they were completely, I thought at first these were American soldiers, complete everything. They had casket and the uniform and the weapons, everything. The Americans armed Ukrainian army with the intention to suppress Donbass, the remainder of it, and declare victory. But it didn't work out because the Donbass people, they fought, their militia fought them. The Russian army wasn't even there at that time. They were the ones who fought and who defended this one little corner of Donbass on their own, and they survived. And only then the Russians came into their rescue. And they've been pushing very, very slowly. And this is what, again, people are saying, oh, Russia is a paper tiger because they're moving so slowly. It's incremental and this and that. So let me explain why this is the way it is. In a way, the Russian-Ukraine war will come down in history as a very, very strange war because it's a war like no other. Because if you look at the way the Israelis bombed Hamas with hundreds of thousands of people killed, and they're
Or
just
NATO did
blowing.
Libya, or NATO destroyed Libya, or the
Yeah,
way
yeah,
NATO
or
bombed
the way the
Fallujah.
Americans destroyed Dresden in
Yes.
Hamburg and Berlin and Stuttgart. The Russians do not bomb civilian areas. Now there are civilian casualties, but it's like two or three or four each time. The Western explodes. Oh, the Russian assault on Kiev, so many casualties. No, there are no casualties. There are one, two, three, four, five. And these are the remnants, debris of a rocket that falls down on an apartment building and hurts somebody somewhere. But they really, the way they've been storming these cities was surrounding them and then leaving a corridor for those who wanted to flee to flee, and those who stay just dig themselves in the underground or wherever to wait till the Russian troops come. So they were very, very careful about not inflicting civilian casualties. But at the same time, there's huge numbers. I mean, I heard more than 1 million Ukrainian soldiers who were killed. And a lot of times it's a very cruel war. The Ukrainians are killing themselves, those that are trying to surrender. Because that a lot of Ukrainian boys want to surrender to the Russians, but it's very dangerous because they could be killed either by the Russians or by the Ukrainian special forces who want to make sure there's no surrender. So then they run away. I think the latest number is 300,000 are hiding somewhere from draft, and then almost 2 million in all of Ukraine that are hiding from draft. In other words, the Ukrainian people, it seems to me, are tired of this war, and the young people don't want this war. And the way it is moving so slowly because they want to spare the lives of Russian soldiers. And look, it's a new war in a sense that people, I listen to the reports of military correspondents. There are drones everywhere. As soon as you just stick your head out, you're dead. It's like saturation of drones that make infantry almost impossible to advance. And the way they do advance now, they use quadricycles and they use horses, and they go in small groups at night or when there's clouds so that the satellites cannot see them. And they basically, what they do is they surround the village, and then squeeze out the Ukrainian troops there, or they surrender them and say, you better surrender, or else we'll just kill you. So they surrender, or they leave them a corridor to leave. In other words, it's very slowly, simply because they want to save lives. If they wanted to just bomb the hell out of it, they could have done it. But they don't want a ruined Ukraine. I mean, the war is going on in the territory, and the citizens in this territory are citizens of Russia, because that's Donbass. There's only two areas where the action is taking place very slowly that are not officially Donbass, which is in Sumy region and Kharkov, even though it's Novorossiya. But the major battles are around Slavyansk and around Kramatorsk. That's the territory of the Donetsk People Republic. These people automatically would have Russian passports as soon as the Russian army comes there. So in many ways, it should be looked at as a civil war. By the way, I want to mention here for your listeners, there's a great British colleague of mine who wrote a wonderful book about the origin of Ukraine war. His name is Richard Sakwa, and he teaches in Britain, I think University of Kent, and he's a friend of mine, and I share fully his understanding. But he described in many sophisticated ways of how Ukraine war is an international war. It's a civil war. It's a war of NATO against Russia. All these various layers of this complex picture. But I'm saying I'm not alone. There are other people, including in Britain, scholars like me, who have a very similar understanding of this war.
Yes, Vladimir, thank you so much. What was the name of that? Richard, how?
Richard Sakwa is Sakwa.
Sakwa, Richard Sakwa. Okay, because the other thing that seems to me about the way that Putin is, well, how the Russians are carrying out this war is, and like you said, like against NATO, because what they're slowly done is pretty much diminished the NATO's weaponry, where they have
Yes,
nothing left. And there's a film that Tom Luongo talks about where some zombies arrive somewhere, and the zombies eat up the cops. And then one of the zombies gets in the car or something and says, "Send more cops."
yeah.
So it's a little, yeah, send us more of your Patriot missiles and all of that, and send us more. Your Leopard tanks and whatever, we'll destroy them. Yeah, send more, right? So it is a war against NATO and NATO hegemony. And it's
Yes,
absolutely fascinating listening to you. Thank you so much, because there's more to discuss about what's happening uh, currently between the European Union, NATO, and Russia and
yes,
the
yes,
rest of the
yes,
world. And you are coming back, fingers crossed, to do a video with Alex Krainer, who you and I both admire very much. That'll be
yes.
fascinating. So everybody, please comment, like, subscribe, go follow Vladimir's work on YouTube, and share this video. And thank you so much, Vladimir, and thank you everybody for watching. All the best. Bye bye.
Bye bye.